Welcome, pilgrims, disciples, rising investment gurus. You have reached your destination. You are now at the portals of the temple of the divine dividend discount models. And true knowledge will be imparted upon you. Yeah, some of it's going to sound like Sanskrit, like stuff that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but don't worry, dear students, all shall be revealed. Sorry. Yeah, because some of the words we're going to use are going to sound really strange, but the calculations are actually very easy. It's the concepts that are going to trip you up and the words that are going to trip you up. But make sure you do the worksheets, do the calculations over and over and over again. And eventually the concepts and the verbiage and the jargon is going to catch up to you and you'll be inundated. You'll be immersed. You will be true risen investment gurus. Slide number 6. One popular group of models of fundamental analysis is the dividend discount models. The group is a group of models called dividend discount models. Shares of stock are valued on the basis of the present value of the future dividend streams the stock is projected to produce. So if you remember in our first presentation, the previous presentation, we said the value of the stock is based on the present value of its future cash flows. In other words, what's it going to bring in the door? What's the stock going to pay us? Therefore, the dividend discount model should be extremely popular, right? Well, not always. During the late 1990s, investors who adhered to these types of models were considered old-fashioned and outdated fuddy-duddies, all washed up. Those investors weathered the 2000 to 2002 bear market very well. In fact, many of those stocks went up. And some of you were not around then, but there were two groups of stocks, the new economy and the old economy. And the old economy were, oh my goodness. Yeah, well, those were companies, very boring companies that didn't, do very well at the late 90s when the internet bubble was exploding, but they held up very well when it burst. Also, dividend payers did well in 2022 when the growth stocks, the FANGs, the Magnificent Seven, whatever you want to call them, when they slid. Dividends don't lie. Dividends are always a positive, and it's the one number of all the numbers that the company reports to the world that you know is true. Why? Because they sent you a check. Well, they don't send a check anymore, but you got the idea. They paid you. Slide number 7. Slide number 7. The discount rate. Now, this is a very unfortunate term. We're mostly going to use required rate of return or expected rate of return. But the discount rate is the term you're going to hear often when you get into a group of investors. Is the required rate of return, the expected rate of return, the desired rate of return, they all mean the same thing, that we choose to calculate the value of shares of a stock using the dividend discount model. The predicted valuations are very sensitive to our required rate of return. Our results will vary wildly depending upon our choice of the required rate of return. Look, the fact that everyone has a different required rate of return means that different investors will expect and demand different stock prices. Somebody might be happy with 6%. Another person expects 10%, and a third wants 15%. It is the difference of opinion that makes horse races, which is a very useful adage here, but it maybe doesn't translate well. In other words, if everybody's bet on the same horse, it wouldn't be a horse race, right? And the same thing here. We are going to see that different companies have different risk reward profiles, and other investors are going to expect more or less, and that's what is going to rule our models. So some people are going to say, "Oh, I'm happy with 6%." Some people are happy to say, "No, I want 10%," and other people want 15%. The first one we'll take a look at is the zero growth model. This assumes that dividends will continue at a fixed rate indefinitely into the future. These work well for companies that are really boring, like utilities, where we don't expect them to grow very much, and they've been paying a certain amount of dividends for many years. The formula is very simple. You take the annual dividends and divide it by the required rate of return. So let's see an example of a company that's been paying $3 per share for many years. If our required rate of return is 6%, then we would divide the $3 annual dividends by the 6% required rate of return, and that would equate to a $50 per share stock. We would expect the stock to be $50. Now, it might be more, it might be less. That's the market price. If it were more, we might say, well, not something we're interested in. If it were less, maybe we're potentially interested in this company. But as we're going to see, we do not make a final decision on any stock just based on these models. These models are here to point us towards stocks that may or may not be ones that we want to own in our portfolio. Does this look familiar to you? Well, for you math fans, it's just another way to view the dividend yield. Slide number 7. Here's the formula. The value of the stock is equal to the annual dividends divided by the required rate of return. Well, what we did is we just swapped a few values. We took the annual dividends and left them in the numerator, but we swapped the value of the stock and the market price of the stock and the required rate of return in the dividend yield. So it's just another way of looking at dividend yield. What is this stock paying us? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, flipping, quotient, denominator and the numerator, just ignore it. But the takeaway is that investors who emphasize the zero growth model are valuing the stock almost exclusively for its dividend yield. In other words, when we said that stocks give us optionally growth, capital appreciation, and optionally dividends, these investors are not interested in the capital gains, in the growth. They want the dividends. They want the income. What is the current income the stock is generating from its dividends? So let's take a look on slide number 10 at a real-life example. This is Consolidated Edison, which is the electric company for New York and surrounding areas. And it's been around in one shape or another for over 200 years. I forget exactly what it started as in 1822, I think. And it became a gas company lighting the gas lights along the way. Then they replaced them with electricity. And yeah, the current market share as of 26th of September was $103.12 a share. They've been paying $3.32 for several years. So we ask ourselves, what's our required rate of return? Well, let's say if we want 8%. That's, again, we choose the discount rate. We choose the required rate of return, the expected rate of return, the desired rate of return. You'll see those four terms used interchangeably. They all mean the same thing. In other words, what do we want out of this stock? If we choose 8%, we take $3.32 divided by 0.08. Do it on your calculator. Make sure I didn't mess up because I make a lot of mistakes. Or $41.50. Well, the stock is selling for over $100. So we believe the stock is overpriced if our required rate of return is 8%. What if we said, okay, we're happy with 5%? $3.32 dividends divided by 5%, 0.05, 0.05. Do it on your calculator. $66 it's still too expensive. So with a market price of $103.12, the stock is yielding 3.22%, which is pretty low for a utility, but not unheard of. A lot of utilities are not paying what they used to pay in the past because investors have bid up the price so that the dividend yield on that price is less. The zero growth model is used for stable income producing stocks. Now, we hope you will print out both worksheets for chapter 4 and do them over and over again. And in the face-to-face class, we would now turn our attention to the first problem in the worksheet number 1. But that, we're not in a face-to-face class, so you're going to do that on your own. But make sure you do it, okay? Make sure you do it. And of course, there's an answer key and a commentary. So yes, you can do this. Slide number 11. The next model is called the Gordon Growth Model after Dr. Gordon at the University of Toronto, I think. Also called the Constant Perpetual Growth Model, which I think is a silly name. Constant perpetual, don't they mean the same thing? I don't know. Anyway, assume that dividends will continue to grow at a specified rate perpetually. I love that word though. You get to spit on your friends. Perpetually into the future. So what Dr. Gordon did is he took the zero growth model and just moved it one step further. If you notice, here's the zero growth model on the left-hand side. Annual dividends divided by the required rate of return. Well, what if those annual dividends are growing at a dividend growth rate that we're able to ascertain? Maybe this company's been growing their dividends 5% or 8% for many years. And then in the bottom, we subtract that dividend growth rate from the required rate of return. So annual dividends times 1 plus the dividend growth rate divided by the required rate of return minus the dividend growth rate. So let's say this company has been growing their dividends about 5% a year. If our annual dividend is $1, then next year we expect it to be $1.05. Annual dividends times 1 plus 5%, 1.05, or $1.05. If we set up our required rate of return as 10%, again, that's what we choose, 10%, then the formula becomes the annual dividends, $1, times 1.05, or $1.05, divided by 10% minus 5%, our required rate of return, the discount rate, minus the dividend growth rate. So make sure that you do the numerator first, then the denominator, and then divide, okay? Don't do it in just one line, unless your calculator is smart enough. No, don't do it, because if your calculator is smart, it's going to mess things up. So don't do the numerator first, then the denominator, and you'll get the right answer. So the numerator is $1 times 1.05, or $1.05. The bottom is 10% minus 5%, which is 5%, 0.10 minus 0.005, and we get $1.05 of dividends divided by 0.05, or $21. So we believe the model says the stock should be worth $21. Now, what is the market price? Who knows? The market price was whatever people are willing to buy and sell the stock for. So we use this as a measure, as a way to say, well, it's selling for $24. Maybe it's a little too expensive for us. Hey, it's selling for $16. Let's do more research. You see, it's not a signal to buy or sell the stock. No. It's just a pointer. It's just pushing us towards companies that may potentially fulfill our required rate of return. So let's take a look at some examples of real life companies. The first one is Target, that fabulously exclusive French department store Target. Yeah, I know. Target. Okay, as of September 26th, it was selling for $155.98. Currently paying $4.48 in annual dividends. Let's assume the dividends are growing around 8%. So, okay, our required rate of return, let's say 13%. So we take the annual dividends, $4.48, times 1 plus 8% dividend growth rate, 1.08. Divide that whole thing, remember, do the numerator first. Divide that by 13%, our required rate of return, our discount rate, our expected rate of return, our desired rate of return. Get used to hearing all four of those. Minus the dividend growth rate of 8%. So that's 0.13 minus 0.08. And if anybody's having trouble with that, contact me immediately. Going from percentages to decimals to percentages is very important. The folks at the tutoring centers can help you with that. So $4.48 times 1.08 gives us $4.834, 4.834. And then we subtract that by 13% minus 8% or 5%, 0.05, and that gives us a stock price of $96.77, somewhere close to that. Well, the model is saying at 13%, the stock is only worth $97. It's selling for $156 around there. So not a particularly great choice if we require 13%, is it? But hey, what if our required rate of return were only 10%? Then we would do the calculation, except this time we would substitute 10% for our required rate of return, the discount rate, and we would get $4.48 times 1.08, or that same 4.834. This time we would divide it by 10% minus 8%, or 2%, 0.02, and we get a stock price of almost $242. Hey, what a deal, right? Notice how the dividend discount models are very sensitive to our choice of the required rate of return. Look, folks, Target might not be the fanciest store in town, but they sure are profitable. Yes. They're geniuses, actually. I mean, they've had a hard time. Actually, they tried to move into Canada, and you'd think they would have done well because they're based in, I think, in Minneapolis, right up in the Twin Cities area, but they got their butts kicked, and so while Walmart and Amazon and Costco are all trying to go all around the globe, Target is staying close to home. But they're very profitable, and they're geniuses when it comes to getting people to get in debt. They give them that Target credit card, and they'll give you 5% off if you use your Target credit card. Now, why would they do that? Because they know they're going to make a whole lot more money off of your interest that you pay on that credit card. Ooh, oh, come on, fess up. Do you shop at Target? Yeah, we do, yeah. Slide number 13, AbbVie. What a silly name for a company. Well, it used to be part of Abbott Labs, which is a company that's been around for decades. In fact, there's a very great story in Chapter 3 about a woman who bought 3 shares of Abbott Labs when she started there as a secretary, and when she passed away, it was worth over $1.3 million or something like that. Yeah. So AbbVie is a company that was spun off from Abbott Labs, and they make very important drugs, pharmaceuticals. The current market price as of the 26th of September was almost $192, and they're paying $6.20 in annual dividends. So if our required rate of return is 13%, we take the $6.20 times 1.08 again, and then subtract it by 13% minus 8% again. So we get 6.696 divided by 0.05, or almost $134 at $192. The model says, well, you know what? You really shouldn't expect a 13% return from AbbVie. But what if we lowered our required rate of return to 10%? Then we get that same calculation in the numerator, $6.20 times 1.08, divided by 10% minus 8% or 0.02, and you get almost $335. So AbbVie looks like a screaming good deal. But now wait a minute. Should we go out and run out and buy AbbVie? No, the model is just pointing us to companies like AbbVie. We now have to spend a whole lot more time researching their products, their competitors, their customers, their suppliers. The model is just the starting point. Right, okay. You understand that, I hope. And besides, I mean, do you really want to invest in a company that's called AbbVie? Why not? It's been very profitable. Yeah, you think the illegal drug sellers are making a lot of money. You should see what the legal drug sellers make. Slide 14. Illinois Toolworks. Who are they? Illinois Toolworks, specialty industrial machinery. Current market price of $262 as of the 26th of September, and paying $6 in annual dividends. Let's do the drill. Let's start with a assumption that they're growing their dividends at 8%, and our required rate of return is 13%. So $6 times 1.08 divided by 13% minus 8%. Remember, do the numerator first, then the denominator, then do the division. So $6 times 1.08 is $6.48 divided by 13% minus 8%, 0.05, gives us $129.60. But if we're happy with 10%, and dear students, I'm more than happy with 10%. I'm happy with 7, 8, 9% from a stock. If we do 10%, substitute the required rate of return as 10%, then we get $6 times 1.08 divided by 10% minus 8%, and that's $6.48 divided by 10% minus 8% or 2%, and that's $324. Maybe we ought to start spending time researching Illinois Toolworks, who we've never heard of. But it's one of those companies, folks, that's been around for over 100 years. You never hear about them, but yet every day you're surrounded by their products and you don't even know it. Because you don't buy things from Illinois Toolworks. Other companies that make stuff buy from them. Does that make sense? And this is the thing, everything. Oh, I think I'm going to invest in Apple. I'm going to invest in Amazon. There are thousands of companies, folks. You don't have to just buy the ones that they talk about in the news every day. Slide number 15. Packaging Corporation of America. People get all excited. I'm going to invest in Amazon. And I say, well, or other online retailers. I say, well, what did that combination ice crusher MP3 player come in? What? What was it packaged in? What it came in a box, a cardboard box. Did you ever bother to think about who made the box? Did you ever look at the bottom of the box and see who made it? Well, here's one of the companies that makes cardboard. They've been doing it since 1867, right after the Civil War. The current market price is $214.81. They're currently paying $5 in annual dividends. Let's assume the dividends are growing around 8%. What if our required rate of return is 13%? Well, $5 times 1.08, right? I hope you got this. I hope you're doing this while we're, pause the presentation, get your calculator, 99-cent calculator out, and do these calculations. Divided by 13% minus 8%, that's $5.40 divided by 0.05, 5%, or $108. But if we lower our required rate of return to 10%, then the calculation is very different. $5 times 1.08 divided by 10% minus 8% gives us $5.40 divided by 2%, or $270. Yippee. If we're happy with a company, boring company, that makes cardboard boxes, this appears to be a good choice, huh? Yeah. So when you think about these really, really hot companies, think about the products that they use, that they have to buy to do their things. And that's Packaging Corporation of America. Now, how about McDonald's. McDonald's. They're in the business of selling you unhealthy, bad, expensive food that gives people heart attacks, strokes, and diabetes. And this is brilliant, folks. We sell them the fat, grease, and sugar, the fat, sugar, and salt that gives them the bad health. And then we sell them the diabetes drugs with Novo Nordisk and other, sometimes investors have to think, is this a good product to buy or is this a good stock to buy? In this case, the stock is a hell of a lot better to buy than the food. The current, and I'm not biased, of course. Yeah, right. I just think this stuff is horrible. But hey, people want to buy it. It's their business. $3.03 to $303.65 as of 26th of September. Currently paying $6.68 in annual dividends. Assume the dividends are also growing around 8% per year. What if our required rate of return is 13%? Well, $6.68 times 1.08. I hope you've been doing these, right? Do them now. Divided by 13% minus 8% gives us 7.2144 divided by 0.05 or $144. But if we possibly could coax 10% from McDonald's, what would that give us? $6.68 times 1.08 divided by 10% minus 8%, 7.2144 divided by 0.02, or $360.72. Well, of course, people love to coat their arteries with plaque, and McDonald's is not the only one who's willing to sell them this stuff. What do you think? Would you buy McDonald's? Would you buy Altria or Philip Morris or British American Tobacco that sell people products that, when used as directed, kill their consumers? Well, actually, all these companies have been pretty darn good investments. Yeah, as we said, sometimes you buy the company's products and sometimes you buy the company's shares. Okay, let's continue. Oh, who is that?
No.
Who are you?
You know who it is.
It's my conscience.
Come clean.
Come clean about what?
Fess up.
Fess up about what?
Where did you get the assumed dividend growth, huh?
I made it up.
Huh?
I made them up. All these companies are growing their dividends faster than 8%.
That's better.
Oh, don't you just hate it when your conscience comes to call? Folks, notice that in all of these all these exercises, we've just assumed that the companies were growing their dividends at 8%. We didn't bother to check what they were doing. They're growing their dividends at. Let's take a look at the reality, and we will see that all of these companies are growing their dividends at 8% or better. The Gordon growth model is very sensitive to the assumed growth rate of dividends. The recent dividend growth rates of Target, AbbVie, Illinois Tool Works, McDonald's, Packaging Corporation of America, all 8% or higher. AbbVie's 8%, McDonald's 8.3%, Target 8.9%, Packaging Corporation of America 10.6%, and Illinois Tool Works 13%. But folks, the model doesn't work if the required rate of return is equal to or less than the dividend growth rate. You get division by zero or negative prices. So we should actually raise our expected rate of returns for all these companies. Actually, all these companies, except for AbbVie, which is right at 8%, are doing better than what the model tells us at 10 or 13%. But note, folks, these are large companies with long histories of rising dividends, but they're not alone. This is why we have so far, tilted your thinking toward companies that have been around for decades and done well in good times and bad times. Are they going to explode on the upside like a brand new company in a whole new growth industry? Well, no, but over time, dividend companies that have been raising their dividends consistently over decades have been some of the best performing stocks in history over time. Yeah, that's why we say it takes time. Okay, now let's continue. The next model is called the constant growth model. And it is essentially the Gordon growth model taken one step further. You see, there's a whole lot of money to be made, and so there's a whole lot of people trying to come up with new models. And this assumes that dividends will continue to grow at a specified rate for a specified number of years. So this thing right here is the mathematical way we write the Gordon growth rate, which I absolutely hate. But the big D stands for dividends. And then notice we don't have a times button right there. It's times 1 plus the growth rate, the dividend growth rate is G, divided by the R, required rate of return, minus the dividend growth rate. Well, that's the Gordon growth model. And then this puppy over here is the added term to account for the growth for a number of years. And the question mark means, yes, you do not have to know this one. No. That's what the question mark means. 1 minus the 1 plus the growth rate divided by 1 plus the required rate of return to the number of years, T years, 5, 10, whatever. This model takes the Gordon growth model one step further, adding a term to account for constant growth for a number of years, just as the Gordon growth model evolved from the zero growth model, adding an additional term to account for the consistent growth of dividends. Now, why am I showing you this? Because if we're not going to use it, because to impress upon you that the ones that we're going to use are just not even a handful of models that are out there and that some people use and some people ignore. There are many models, and you have the rest of your life to play with them. But if you just stick with the ones in our class, I personally believe you'll do okay. But did we mention there's no guarantees? Yes, I think we did. Slide number 19. The two-stage dividend growth model. Folks, this takes the growth model that we just saw and adds yet another term. This is also called the variable growth model or the multi-stage growth model. This assumes the dividends will grow at a specified rate into the future, presumably the fast dividend growth rate stage, and then grow at a second, presumably the slower growth rate once the company matures. And notice that it is really, really sophisticated, and it may look very impressive, especially those who love math, but it has serious problems. Forget the math, forget all the arithmetic. It is very difficult to accurately predict future dividend growth during the initial fast growth stage of a stock, because typically they need that money to reinvest back into the company. They're in growth stage. Now, not all companies are like that. For example, the tech companies which had amassed huge amounts of cash coming out of their ears and not paying dividends because they're growth companies, and then all of a sudden they think, you know what, maybe we should start paying dividends. And then usually then you don't know what they're going to do with that cash. They could turn around, buy more shares of stock, give themselves big bonuses. Many decades ago, Benjamin Graham, who wrote The Intelligent Investor, which is you're going to read eventually, right? He was Warren Buffett's teacher, warned against using overly sophisticated mathematical models to value stocks. Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should, and it certainly doesn't mean that we're going to model the reality that actually happens. Cool? So again, we show you this, not so that you're going to use it. And if you are so inclined, go ahead, play with it if you want to. You got to get rid of all the skulls and crossbones and radioactive signs and bombs. But we're not going to do it. So just ignore that. Okay, time for a reflection. Slide number 20. Observations of the dividend discount models. How do you use these versions of the models for companies that aren't paying any dividends? Well, the simple answer is you can't, right? If there are no dividends, 0 times anything is 0. So basically the dividend growth model, these versions of the dividend growth model that we've just looked at all say that the company's worth nothing. And obviously that's not the case, right? Dividend growth rates are very difficult to estimate. With large, well-established companies, historical growth rates may be useful, but with fast-growing companies in new industries, it's almost impossible since most fast-growing companies just aren't paying dividends. The problems of the dividend discount models notwithstanding, repeat after me. The value of a stock is based on the present value of its future cash flows. In other words, what's in it for me? What am I going to get in terms of cash out of this stock? Now go back over. I know the words are harder than the actual calculations. The calculations are very easy. And now is when in the face-to-face class we would go through the next 1 or 2 exercises in the worksheets. Okay, so make sure you do these Gordon growth model exercises. Because, oh my goodness, when we come back, dear students, oh my goodness, we are going to learn a model that is one of the dividend discount models, but not only is it my favorite awesome model, it will also show us that we can actually use this next model when the company is not paying dividends. And you will be, after this next presentation, official investment gurus. Dear students, we are so proud of you. Study every day. Bring honor and glory to your friends, your family members, your coworkers, Southwestern Community College, and of course, to yourself. See you in our next presentation.